It is 1:29 a.m. The Western Pacific Ocean, 740 nautical miles east of the Chinese coastline, in water that runs over 5,000 meters deep and carries none of the commercial shipping traffic that crowds the sea lanes closer to the coast. At this distance, in this direction, there is nothing on the surface except what the United States Navy has chosen to put here. The sky is clear and cold by Pacific standards, 11 degrees Celsius at altitude, with stars visible from horizon to horizon in the way that only deep ocean darkness permits. The Milky Way, a luminous river overhead that the sailors on watch can see clearly from the flight deck during the quiet moments between launch cycles. The sea state is 2. Swells 1.5 meters from the northwest. Wind at 13 knots. It is a beautiful night in the most strategically contested body of water on Earth, and the beauty is entirely irrelevant to what is about to happen. USS John C or Stennis, CVN 74, has been operating in this area for 28 hours, conducting freedom of navigation and theater presence operations that the United States has conducted in the Western Pacific continuously and without interruption since the end of the Second World War. She is the center of a carrier strike group whose combined weapons inventory, sensor architecture, and crew experience represent an aggregation of American defense investment so substantial that quoting a number invites the accusation of exaggeration. She is not alone. She has never been alone. Her escorts, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the inner screen, USS Lake Erie, operating as the dedicated ballistic missile defense cruiser, 16 nautical miles to the north, and USS John Paul Jones, positioned 29 nautical miles to the northwest, in the geometry calculated to optimize SM-3 Block IIA engagement solutions against threats originating from the Chinese mainland, have been in their assigned stations since the strike group entered the current operating area 11 hours ago. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye on Station 95 nautical miles to the west has been feeding continuous radar data into the Link 16 network since 3 p.m. the previous afternoon. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force has also been watching for 28 hours. This is not a surprise to anyone in USS Stennis's Combat Information Center. The PLA's surveillance architecture in the Western Pacific, the Beidou satellite constellation, the over-the-horizon radar networks on the Chinese coast, the maritime patrol aircraft conducting routine coverage of the carrier's operating area, has been generating position updates on the strike group at intervals measured in minutes throughout the transit. The plan knows where Stennis is. They have known for the entirety of her time in the Western Pacific. And tonight, someone with sufficient authority in the PLA command structure has decided that the carrier's presence in these waters requires a response that goes beyond the harassment operations and gray zone confrontations that have characterized Chinese naval behavior in the region for the last decade. Tonight, they are going to fire the DF-26, the Dongfeng 26, NATO designation CSS-18, the weapon that Chinese state media calls the Guam Killer, a name that reveals both the weapon's intended operational purpose and the strategic thinking of the people who gave it that name, because a missile named for a specific American territory is a missile whose political messaging is as carefully designed as its propulsion system. The DF-26 is a road-mobile, solid-fueled, intermediate-range ballistic missile with a claimed range of 4,000 kilometers, sufficient to reach not just Guam, but American carrier operating areas throughout the Western Pacific. It is a dual-capable weapon. The same airframe can carry a conventional precision strike warhead or a nuclear warhead, a design choice that creates deliberate ambiguity for any defender trying to assess the intent of an incoming launch. Its terminal maneuvering re-entry vehicle, the warhead bus that separates from the booster in the midcourse phase and homes on its target during re-entry, is designed to maneuver unpredictably to complicate missile defense intercept solutions. Chinese state media has described the DF-26 as capable of conducting precision strikes against large surface ships at sea, specifically and explicitly against American aircraft carriers. The PLA Rocket Force is going to fire 3 of them tonight. Not at Guam. At USS John C. Stennis. Let us be precise about what the DF-26 can actually do, as opposed to what Chinese state media claims it can do, because the gap between those two descriptions is operationally significant tonight. The DF-26 is a real intermediate-range ballistic missile. It achieves real range. Its re-entry vehicle maneuvers in a way that is genuinely more complex than an unguided ballistic arc. These things are true. What is also true is the following. A ballistic missile targeting a moving aircraft carrier faces a fundamental problem that no amount of Chinese engineering has yet resolved. The problem of finding a ship that has moved since the targeting solution was built. At launch minus 11 minutes, the last Beidou satellite pass had placed USS Stennis at a specific set of coordinates. Those coordinates entered the DF-26's fire control computer. The missile's re-entry vehicle terminal seeker, an active radar system designed to acquire and home on a large surface ship during the terminal phase, was programmed with the carrier's last known position and a search radius calculated to account for carrier movement during the flight time. The DF-26's flight time from the launch area in Qinghai Province to the target area in the Western Pacific is approximately 14 minutes. In 14 minutes, USS Stennis at 18 knots covers approximately 4.2 nautical miles. The terminal seeker's search radius was designed to account for this movement. The designers calculated, correctly, that 4.2 nautical miles of uncertainty is manageable for a radar seeker of the DF-26's capability. They did not calculate for 14 minutes of movement in a direction chosen specifically to maximize the distance from the predicted impact point. They did not calculate for a carrier executing a deliberate, pre-planned evasive maneuver the moment her CIC received launch warning. And they did not calculate for an electronic warfare environment in the target area, where the terminal seeker's active radar is being aggressively jammed by assets whose existence and capability the DF-26's designers were not fully briefed on. At 1:29:44 a.m., SBIRS detected 3 simultaneous launch signatures from a deployment area in Qinghai Province, China. The infrared signatures of 3 DF-26 solid-fueled boosters, igniting within 4 seconds of each other, were unmistakable. Large, bright, short-duration thermal events consistent with intermediate-range ballistic missile launch. The SBIRS uplink reached the Aegis network aboard USS Lake Erie within 9 seconds of first motor ignition. 9 seconds. The DF-26 boosters had been burning for 9 seconds when every Aegis ship in the strike group received the launch data. In the CIC aboard USS Stennis, The SBIRS alert arrived at 1:29:53 a.m. The watch officer had it on the Strike Group Commander's display within 4 seconds of receipt. The Strike Group Commander, a Vice Admiral with 31 years in naval aviation, who had been in the CIC since 1 a.m. based on a signals intelligence advisory that PLA Rocket Force communications had shown elevated activity patterns consistent with pre-launch checklist execution, looked at the launch data with the particular quality of attention that very experienced military officers develop: focused, rapid, and entirely free of anything that could be called surprise. "Execute November," he said. "Execute November." 2 words. A pre-planned response package that had been developed, refined, briefed, exercised, and loaded into the strike group's operational framework before the ship left its home port. November covered 3 categories of action simultaneously. The first was carrier maneuvering. Stennis immediately accelerated to 30 knots and came to a new course, not the course the evasion plan specified, which was the obvious course, but the course the strike group commander had added to the plan 3 days ago during a private revision session with his navigator, because he believed that an enemy sophisticated enough to access the evasion plan documentation would anticipate the specified course, and the right answer was the unexpected one. The carrier turned 40 degrees to the south and drove hard. In 14 minutes, at 30 knots on an unexpected heading, she would be 7.1 nautical miles from her last known position. And the 7.1 miles would be in a direction the DF-26's targeting solution did not account for. The second category was electronic warfare. 2 EA-18G Growlers from the carrier's air wing, which had been spotted on the flight deck in a ready posture since 11 p.m. the previous night, launched within 4 minutes of the Execute November order. They climbed to 28,000 feet and established an orbit between the carrier and the bearing from which the DF-26 reentry vehicles would approach. The EA-18G's ALQ-218 jamming system began pre-configuring for the specific frequency bands associated with the DF-26 terminal seeker radar. Frequency parameters that had been derived from signals intelligence collection on previous DF-26 test events and loaded into the jamming system's library. When the DF-26 reentry vehicles activated their terminal seekers during the final phase of their approach, they would be doing so in an electromagnetic environment that the EA-18Gs were already shaping to produce false returns, degraded range accuracy, and bearing errors that would translate, at hypersonic terminal approach speed, into missed distances measured in nautical miles rather than meters. The third category was the missile defense engagement. USS Lake Erie, the dedicated BMD cruiser, had her AN/SPY-1D in full ballistic missile defense mode within 60 seconds of the SBIRS alert. Her fire control team was already computing midcourse intercept solutions against all 3 DF-26 tracks using the trajectory data from SBIRS cross-corroborated with the E-2D's independent radar picture. The DF-26's midcourse phase, the arc above the atmosphere where the boosted payload separates from the rocket and follows a predictable Keplerian trajectory before the maneuvering re-entry vehicle separates and begins its terminal glide, is where the SM-3 Block IIA excels. Above the atmosphere, predictable physics, clean geometry, no jamming, no maneuvering, no atmospheric interference. The intercept window in the midcourse phase is narrow. The DF-26 transits through optimal intercept altitude quickly. But it is real, and Lake Erie's fire control team had been refining their solution for 4 minutes and 17 seconds by the time the commanding officer authorized the first SM-3 launch. The first SM-3 Block IIA launched from Lake Erie at 1:34:07 a.m., 4 minutes and 23 seconds after the DF-26 boosters ignited. The SM-3 is a kinetic interceptor. It eliminates its target by direct collision rather than explosive warhead, relying on the energy of a closing velocity measured in kilometers per second to neutralize the target. The intercept vehicle that separates from the SM-3's third stage carries a long-wave infrared seeker that acquires the DF-26 reentry vehicle against the cold background of space. A thermal contrast that is unambiguous and consistent regardless of what electronic countermeasures the target carries, because the physics of infrared detection above the atmosphere are not affected by radar jamming. The first SM-3 intercepted the lead DF-26 reentry vehicle at 1:38:41 a.m. at an altitude of 312 kilometers, well above the atmosphere, in the cold dark of near space, 480 nautical miles northwest of USS John C. Stennis. The intercept was confirmed by SBIRS thermal detection within 3 seconds. The re-entry vehicle ceased to exist as a coherent object. Its fragments, dispersing in the vacuum above the atmosphere, posed no threat to anything on the surface below. USS John Paul Jones fired her first SM-3 at 1:34:19 a.m. against the second DF-26 track. Intercept confirmed at 1:38:58 a.m., altitude 287 kilometers. Lake Erie fired her second SM-3 at 1:34:31 a.m. against the third track. This intercept was the most technically demanding of the three. The third DF-26 had been launched on a slightly different trajectory that compressed the midcourse intercept window by approximately 40 seconds. Lake Erie's fire control team had identified this during their solution development and had pre-positioned the SM-3 launch time accordingly. The intercept occurred at 1:38:49 a.m., altitude 271 kilometers. All 3 DF-26 re-entry vehicles had been eliminated before any of them descended below 270 kilometers altitude. The EA-18G Growlers, whose jamming had been pre-configured for a terminal engagement that never materialized because the SM-3 layer was comprehensive, continued their orbit for another 22 minutes before recovering aboard. Their ALQ-218 systems had generated a complete emissions intelligence package from the DF-26 guidance systems during the boost and mid-course phases, data that would tell American analysts more about the DF-26's actual onboard electronics than any previous collection opportunity. The missiles had provided their own technical assessment on the way to being eliminated. At 1:43 a.m., USS Stennis received confirmation from Lake Erie that all 3 DF-26 tracks had been resolved. The strike group commander looked at the tactical display for a moment. The carrier was 7.3 nautical miles south of her pre-maneuver position at 30 knots, her wake cutting a long white line into the dark Pacific. He authorized Execute November stand down. He authorized a return to normal cruising speed and a gradual resume of the pre-planned transit heading. He notified 7th Fleet of the engagement outcome in a classified operational report whose tone was, by the standards of a document describing the defeat of a ballistic missile attack on an American aircraft carrier, remarkably matter-of-fact. In the intelligence and strategic analysis community, the DF-26 has received enormous attention as a potential game-changer in Western Pacific naval competition, the weapon that holds American carriers at risk throughout the region, that potentially pushes the boundary of safe carrier operations well east of the first island chain, that fundamentally alters the calculus of American power projection in the Indo-Pacific. This attention is not entirely misplaced. The DF-26 is a real capability. Its range is real. Its dual nuclear and conventional role creates genuine deterrence ambiguity. Its development and deployment represent a serious, sustained effort by the PLA Rocket Force to build exactly the kind of long-range anti-access capability that American strategic planners find most concerning. But the DF-26's effectiveness against a prepared carrier strike group depends on a chain of assumptions about targeting solution freshness, about carrier movement predictability, about the electromagnetic environment in the terminal phase, and most critically, about the missile defense architecture surrounding the carrier. That tonight's engagement exposed as optimistic. The targeting solution was 11 minutes old at launch, and the carrier moved in an unexpected direction. The terminal seeker jamming environment was pre-configured against the specific radar frequencies that DF-26 test events had revealed. And the SM-3 Block IIA engagement layer intercepted all 3 reentry vehicles in the midcourse phase, above the atmosphere, where the DF-26's maneuvering capability had not yet activated, and the intercept geometry was cleanest. The PLA Rocket Force will study the engagement results. They will update their models. They will modify their approach. This is the nature of great power military competition. It does not resolve in a single engagement. But the question that tonight answers, can a carrier strike group, properly warned, properly prepared, and properly positioned, defeat a DF-26 salvo before any warhead reaches the target area, has been answered comprehensively, with 3 SM-3s and 0 residual tracks. USS Stennis resumed her transit at 2:01 a.m. Her air wing flew its scheduled dawn cycle. Her crew ate breakfast. The Western Pacific was quiet. And somewhere in the hardened communications architecture of the PLA Rocket Force, someone was reading a telemetry report that showed 3 missiles had been neutralized before any of their re-entry vehicles reached the terminal phase, and was beginning the uncomfortable process of explaining how that had happened. USS Stennis resumed her transit at 2:01 a.m. Her air wing flew its scheduled dawn cycle. Her crew ate breakfast. The Western Pacific was quiet. And somewhere in the hardened communications architecture of the PLA Rocket Force, someone was reading a telemetry report that showed 3 missiles had been neutralized before any of their re-entry vehicles reached the terminal phase, and was beginning the uncomfortable process of explaining how that had happened. The answer involved several components that the PLA's targeting planners had underweighted. It involved SBIRS detection at 9 seconds that gave the strike group 14 full minutes of warning. Enough time not just to react, but to execute a pre-planned response package with the precision of a rehearsed evolution. It involved a carrier that moved in a direction the targeting solution did not predict, because the strike group commander had revised the standard evasion plan 3 days earlier
with exactly this kind of targeting solution invalidation in mind. It involved SM-3 Block IIA interceptors that engaged in the midcourse phase, where the DF-26's maneuvering capability had not yet activated, removing the one technical characteristic that makes the weapon genuinely difficult to intercept in terminal defense. And it involved an integrated sensor and communications architecture, SBIRS the E-2D, Link 16, the Aegis network across multiple ships, that processed 9 seconds of launch data into a coordinated 3-ship BMD engagement response in under 5 minutes. The answer was simple. The carrier strike group was more capable than the weapon sent against it. It was better warned, better integrated, better defended. And it had been preparing for exactly this engagement for longer than the people who planned the attack had been planning it. Bye for now.